What do you see as some of the biggest differences when data is your business versus when data is just something that you use internally for better decision making?
And again, in both scenarios, I think that it's really important that we have the right operating model. The folks that are internal core of the heart of the data business, like, or even really enabling these data pipelines, have to have this view of the market.
When you think about a top data person versus a typical data person, what are some of the key differences that you see?
Data people who are techno-functional, right? Not just technical. When you're purely thinking of data as a technical exercise.
It's important to have those people internal because if you don't have someone like that, you're just going to have a lot of mess on your hands.
And that's where the ID support gets bombarded with these questions. And sometimes they don't have that context, right? Data with context is content. And they don't have that context. They just have the data or they face all these issues.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Delivery Layer podcast. I've got Maya Harita with me. Maya is a very well-established data executive and friend, and we sort of know each other from the data world, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. Maya, thank you so much for joining.
Awesome. Thanks, Solomon. It's wonderful to be here. It's we've had so many conversations in the past and it's great to reconnect.
Cool. And I'm happy to have one now in front of whoever is going to watch this. Do you want to share a little bit just around sort of like your background in data and some of the really cool jobs that you've had along your career journey?
Absolutely. So I started my career way back in the 90s, really around coding. And I started as a developer and just grew my way through various parts of the business. A point in time, I was actually in the HR, managing a lot of the recruitment processes, and then moved on to recruitment systems, HRIS systems, and then kind of worked my way into being a client partner, facing stakeholders internally and externally, professional services in a professional services environment when I was at Siemens Business Services, and then kind of as decades rolled out, I moved really into the large scale program management around establishing data pipelines, and from there, really looking at connecting the dots across people, process, and technology across companies like General Motors and S&P Global Ratings. I was heading the data organization, and currently I'm at HP, managing all of the data governance and customer privacy engineering.
Yeah, super interesting. And I know that we got connected. Obviously, I've got a strong place in my heart for data businesses, and you were leading data at S&P Ratings, which is essentially, the largest data business in the world, kind of. So super interesting. And thinking to some of your experiences there, because at S&P and other companies that you've led data, um, a lot of these businesses were data businesses before data and technology were tied together. And so how have you navigated that? What was it like to have, on the one hand, you've got this established data business, a lot of best practices. On the other hand, you've got an industry in data that's moving so quickly outside of those big businesses. Like, how do you navigate that as a data leader?
Yeah, absolutely. See, many of these institutions, right, that had, lots of information, right, before we really started calling it data and then intelligence and now, business intelligence, performance management. And then now we are in the AI and generative AI machine learning, right? In this trajectory, the organizations that were, they've had information, right, in different formats even before this technological revolution happened. And if you really see at that time, they were considered innovative, right? I think there was we talk about data growing exponentially, right? And now it's so ubiquitous. It's growing at like the Moore's law is 80 every 18 months or so. It's doubling or tripling. And if you really look at it, at whatever point in time, right, the companies that have been around 7,500 years, they've managed information, right? They were moving along with the pace of technology and innovation as best as they can. But what's happened is that the skills, talent processes that were established that the needs of the business then, some of them never got modernized, right? We got stuck with these old processes and, generations after generations handed off these processes, tried to make small tweaks here and there. Even the really rapid growth of all of our Six Sigma foundational attributes, we still like held on to a lot of these processes in these institutions. So there's so much institutional knowledge. I think that a lot of the folks that have been in the company, I call each of them a mini data warehouse because they have so much knowledge and information in their intelligence in their brains. And however, the actual data flows and the what we call as the water and the pipes, right? The pipes being all of the data architecture and the water being the data that flows through it. That never got as modernized simply because, right, you, as you know, run, eats, transform, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so what I've seen is that as much as there's an appetite and desire for organizations to transform quickly, it's not that easy because got to start at the people layer, and people are used to operating a certain way and they want to make sure that they are meeting business goals and their outcomes and their KPIs. And oftentimes business KPIs are not the same as the data organization's KPIs. So again, from a modernization standpoint, that's a critical aspect to look at. And the next is process layer. All right. And okay, you can bring in a lot of fresh talent and you train the people that are there, but from a process standpoint, just revamping end to end, right, is a challenge in itself. And then add on to that, now you bring in the new technology. So what I've seen is that there is this great desire and appetite and organizational readiness to transform. But where we see a lot of challenge is that the time, right? That, business consumes all of the time. How do you find time in a given quarter or a given year to really push transformation? I think that across the globe, organizations have been successful. They've really tried to prioritize and get further. I see that prioritization as the challenge, right? All of these other things can happen. To be the second part of the question,
Well, I think that was a great answer to the question, right? It was sort of like, it's so interesting because I don't think most people appreciate how brutal some of these transformational efforts are in businesses that have substantial amounts of revenue running through them. It's easy to it's easy to play around with data infrastructure when it's just like your 5-person analytics team that is using it. But when you've got thousands of customers and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue that are going through these systems, it's not nearly as easy to switch them out and make big changes.
right,
So
absolutely.
that's,
And one example is reporting. I've seen that across many of these institutional organizations, even with the emergence of Tableau and Click and all of these Power, BI and all of these tools that have come in. If you look at the legacy reporting, there's thousands and thousands of reports that still, go out right now. Maybe it's not in thousands today. It's still in the hundreds that go out across the organization. And oftentimes you wonder, what's the ROI or the value of this reporting? It's just that it's something that companies have always done so, right? And that transformation to break away from the mold of the old into the new is where all of us data people actually come in, and we wear these multiple hats.
yeah. And I see this now. I saw it from inside previously, and now I see it from the vendor side because when I go into some of these businesses with delivery layer, to rebuild an existing product that's out there is big effort. Most of the customers that I speak with, either they are starting something new or their old system has gotten so old that it's starting to like lose them enough clients that they recognize that it's existential if they don't change it. But you've got a long middle there where you've built a system, clients are using it, they're generally happy, and replacing that is extremely challenging and generally not worth it. So I've definitely lived that as well. What are some of the big differences that you see because you're someone who has experience of data not just as an asset that's used to make decisions, but also as like a business. What do you see as some of the biggest differences when data is your business versus when data is just something that you use internally for better decision making?
Yeah, I want to start off by data just internally used for decision making, right? So I think that when you're using data internally, right, it is you have a lot of latitude in terms of right how you're collecting the data, how you're using it, right, what metrics you want to focus on, and it's really vital, right, as long as it's tied to your business value. And the way I think of it is that does the data value chain and the business value chain having the right handshake, right? So if you have various components in the business value chain, and if you look at the data, like for example, you have supply chain and finance, and you have HR and all these different departments within a company, and you have this data value chain that's supplying to all of these different businesses. Are we having the right water and pipes? Do we have the right architecture and the data flows are happening? You know, so the latitude that you have is that you're really able to invest and you're able to really appropriate funds to that business value chain based on the organizational needs. It's purely internal, right? So now your ability to prioritize, or if it's a year that you're cutting costs, or it's a year where you really want to focus on that, really driving revenue across a particular market, right? You can hyper focus in. So you have a lot more latitude when it's used internally. And again, right, you're able to transform very specifically in niche areas as in when it's needed. When data is your business, and when there are a lot of other stakeholders and a lot of other partners in this market, in this ecosystem, and a lot of competition, for me, the biggest concern in my mind is about two things, about data velocity and data integrity. Velocity in not just speed at which we are going. It's not just 30 miles per hour speed, it's 30 miles per hour north or south. What is directionally, how fast do we want to go, right? Who do we want to get in what kind of data? For example, some of the data that we're working in the past from the automotive industry is all think about vehicle usage and all of around the behavior of the driver and what that impacts insurance and whatnot. And sometimes when we are trying to monetize data on the financial services side, right, there are all these specific. And so velocity is really important, right? Ability to go from the source to destination is extremely vital. But then layer it with data integrity is right about governance and compliance and quality, and making sure that data that is reaching is enriched and it's secure, and it's this data that is refined and usable, right? So there is that, a huge credibility factor, and you can't just return data once somebody uses the data, right? And then you want to make sure that it meets your customer's need and the market need, etc., right? And then when you're in the business of not just having a data marketplace, or you have analytics, self-serve analytics, or self-serve and models, like anything that you're talking about, these advanced technologies now, all the more when that's part of the business, is that the velocity and the integrity become extremely vital. And that's where I feel like, the investments and the focus on the people, process, and tech becomes so critical. And if organizations miss either one, right, one of the levers are not operating in sync with the others, uh, is where you're starting to see latencies happen or performance issues happen. And again, in both scenarios, I think that it's really important that we have the right operating model. I think it's extremely important, especially if data is a business, right? The folks that are internal core of the heart of the data business, like, or even really enabling these data pipeline, have to have this view of the market, have to understand what business is, what business objectives are, or what market needs are, right? It's not just sitting in a silo and creating models or creating reports, etc. So it's that operating model becomes extremely vital.
Yeah, 100%. And I think to dive in on two of those things, I think that until you've had like internal customers are way kinder to your data issues than external customers. Like,
Think
and
your
there are
customers, mine aren't. The internal customers are sometimes harder.
and there are far more external customers. So it's like if there is an issue with something that goes out to someone on the marketing team and they look at it, it's very different than if there's an issue that goes out to 1,000 different marketing teams and then each one of those people is pinging your customer success. It's like a whole different it's a whole different ball game. And what I found is that many people underestimate the amount of QC that has to go into a lot of these data products that are actually reaching any type of commercial scale, because without that, you just, churn all your customers super quickly. Um, and then the other point that you made around the data people understanding more of the business context, I think is also super crucial, because when data is your business, there's no harder bar to reach than someone paying for your analysis out in the market when there's a lot of competitors that are also trying their best to take that customer from you. And if you're not on point when it comes to understanding actually what they need from a business perspective, there's no way they're going to buy it.
Yeah.
So
If
it's
I
like
may
a
add
whole,
perspective to that, what I've seen, if data is your business is that, right? In a certain angle, your customer is also your competition, right? Because what happens is when they're consuming this data, right, they are going to have their own in-house development teams. They have their own in-house analysts. They are now looking to see how to further enrich the data that they have consumed. For example, if you are like, we used to have over 1,000 plus data sources, right, when I was at in the financial services space. And then we would have all this data that comes and we would ingest it and process it. And then, and our consumers would further enrich. And if they saw a lot more issues right now, they're thinking, do we do a lot of this in-house ourselves, right? So how do we continue to incrementally add value to our customers and make sure that they are not having to think about, okay, what is the, to your point, like some of the QC around this and governance and compliance around it is like that refined data that they are receiving is valuable. So it's that, that chain of integrity has to be tight throughout.
yeah, definitely. Um, how do you see the connection between data and engineering for these types of businesses and these types of products? Like, where does data start? Where does engineering end? Does it matter? Like, is it all just one mashup? Like, how do you approach that?
I think that's a great question, actually. We often put data engineering together, right? And if you really look at, you know, I think that, again, going back to the water and the pipes analogy, right? And I know it's commonly referred, if we really look at, to me, building those pipes is that engineering, right? Having the right architecture that enables the data flows, right? How we are ingesting the data and how we are managing and processing. What is that generating that velocity throughout and having the upstream and the downstream data quality. Setting up these platforms and setting up the right architecture is so important. And having the right engineering teams. But these engineering teams need to understand what is the purpose of our business. What is the purpose of these certain data flows? So for example, if you're building a platform that's facing customers, right? Where if it's, let's say it's a subscription model, so customers are paying for this data and this, all of these insights and analytics, right? We want to make sure that we have the right, cloud infrastructure. We want to make sure that we have the right platforms in place. It's really important that the engineering teams have that perspective of the purpose behind what they are building and why they're building. On the privacy side, when we build the engineering, right, it's a completely, I wouldn't say completely, it's a significantly different model because a lot of it is focused on security. A lot of it is focused on every hop of the data. We want to make sure that there is the right level of data quality measures in place, right? So what is really important is faster data flow is important, plus quality, or is just a lot of it's around compliance. Having that perspective, the engineering teams is extremely important, and having the right level of prioritization and being able to scale faster is also critical from an engineering standpoint at a high level. For me, from a data standpoint, right, where I see the difference is that oftentimes we used to call them content specialists in my prior role. And if you look at it, even when I was a GM, right, there were all these folks that are data stewards or data specialists. They knew the data, they knew the business metadata, they knew the technical metadata. They were able to understand data at an in-depth level, and they would be partners to the business SMEs as well, right? So they would understand data at an intricate level, and they will help really curate data through that process. So for me, from a data standpoint, I think that starting to merge these. One thing that I'm particular about that we don't lose focus on these data specialists, people who are not just analyzing the data, people who really understand are able to curate that data, and they know the mutations. They know that after a certain point in time, after a certain level of processing, after you enrich the data, then what happens to the data and how it mutates. Having that end-to-end view, I feel like is super critical. I
Yeah.
think everybody's a data engineer now, but I feel like that to me, it's close to my heart that I used to work in data and I used to understand these data sets so in and out. And remember the good old days when people wrote data dictionaries, right? It's just that expertise is super important.
Yeah, I can think to a number of people over my previous jobs who just had a sixth sense. They could look at the results that came out of a system and they would just like hone in. They'd be like, this number is wrong. Something went wrong here. This is a thing. It just like it was it's not always fun to deal with because they can very quickly highlight all of the things that you made mistakes on, but they're like so crucial for the success of your business because they have this deep sort of intuitive understanding of how things should look, and it's important to have those people internal because if you don't have someone like that, you're just gonna have a lot of mess on your hands.
Right. And that's where the ID support gets bombarded with these questions, and sometimes they don't have that context. Right? Data with context is content, and they don't have that context. They just have the data, or they face all these issues, and then that's when we go into these rabbit holes about really what happened here, right? Because you don't have people. Sometimes that's why when we talk about operating model, do we have the right role and folks that have this institutional knowledge and this understanding of data hops and data mutations, and they, as you said, right, they look at a number, say, oh, that shouldn't be this particular data point, something happened,
Yeah,
and they're able to quickly help resolve.
yeah. Um, so obviously you've had a lot of sort of transformation type roles, and data by its very nature is often playing some sort of transformative role inside companies. What are some of the lessons that you've learned over the years on how to execute these transformations effectively using data inside really big companies?
So transformations, right, are what we when we think of transformation, right? So we often think of it in terms of moving from A to B, right? I feel like so much of effort is in that too, A to B. Oftentimes getting people to one align on what does B really mean, right, to them? What does B mean to the organization? What is the value that B is going to generate? And getting them to all buy in and to move at a time is mammoth of an effort. And you may have heard, I was part of GM digital transformation. And oftentimes when we could, it's almost like, herding cats. When you get one group in, the other groups move back, and then you're like, okay, all right, let's come back. And it's people who've gone through these transformations. I can kind of really attest to the scars that come from the one issue about is the buy-in, right? And I feel like if we can get across the board a buy-in on one, what is that what is that end state like? Do we all align on that end state? Do we all buy into that end state? And are we willing to put up with some pain today so that we have a longer term gain? Right? Getting that rationale, I think, comes through data. And we can articulate our story that A to B, what that looks like, the starting point, ending point, that end state, and that future benefit, and why this pain is worth it. that articulating that story through data, I have seen that very powerful because people often tend to like stories that are very nebulous and it's very nice to hear. But what really gets that buy-in is the data. If we are able to showcase, highlight how is the ecosystem trend, right? So that's one of the things that we did is how are the markets trending? So I used to lead these initiatives around leads and loyalty, right? When you look at our competition, how are they managing this, right? What is that lead processing end to end, right? How does that translate into business value? Because these leads convert into customers, right? Having the right set of processes, having the right transformation will enable us to sell X number of cars, right? And this is what the market's doing. And being able to articulate that story in terms of data, in terms of observations of the market ecosystem, friends, I think is the most pivotal way in aligning teams and stakeholders into moving to the next level or the next stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great perspective. In my experience, the challenge is always that like getting buy-in and alignment isn't binary. And then, you get like 80% alignment and then you have to drag the extra 20% over. And then the projects end up being a lot messier to implement than you plan. Obviously, you plan for things to go well, and you say that there's going to be challenge as we do this, but challenge feels different in the moment when you're facing it than you expect that it's going to feel before you face it. So yeah, it's there's a lot of wisdom behind what you said, and I think you're
Now we have enough data that shows that organizations that transform versus companies that were left behind, right? We can clearly look at now, right, at least, 15 years into this transformation by and large, right? And I think the financial crisis really triggered a lot of the transformation for the financial and services industry, right? But if you really look at it, 15 years after, and companies are still transforming, right? And it's an art and a science. And I think that oftentimes we tend to think of data, like to your point, we tend to think of data as this it's two-dimensional. It's not, it's actually three-dimensional because through data, we can really look at it in various ways. And we now see hindsight, right? There's so much evidence that shows, the difference between companies that really jumped on, took on that short-term pain and have been able to get that long-term gain versus the others.
got it. Yeah, that's very true. Um, so you've spoken a lot about women in data leadership and sort of different leadership styles. Can you share some of the key lessons that you like to talk about just on that topic with the audience?
Absolutely. So when I first started, right, I didn't have a lot of women leaders. There were a few, um, and over the years as I grew in my career, it took me a long time to first realize that you need champions and you need sponsors and mentors in the workplace, which I didn't have, at least in the first decade, because I didn't go after or seek for mentors or champions. And so my career was, pretty, I would say, I grow a little and then plateau and then grow a little and plateau. And what I've come to realize is that organizations need to take women leadership really seriously. And not just, it's not about, having quotas or saying, which is a great start, right? Saying that we really want to push for women leadership in organizations. We want to make sure that we're really finding these, leaders who are hidden in caves and corners and we're doing exceptionally well in their areas, but how do we help them grow? That's absolutely important. I will never diminish the value of it. But more than that, I think what is really important is this larger literacy and education around the fact that women leadership, we don't have we're now starting to see, right, in the last 20, 25 years, we've seen this huge influx of leaders that are emerging and that are doing well and that are showing that leadership styles have always been predominantly designed after male leadership, right? I am not a table banging, not that other bang tables. I'm not one of those very loud, but my style's pretty assertive. I care about collaborative leadership, empathetic leadership. I care about really fostering an environment that's nurturing and yet high performance oriented, right? So there's so many different styles. And I think by and large, we need to have this understanding around what women's leadership looks like. We have so much examples and so much legacy and lineage of male leadership, right? Sometimes we want to superimpose that on women leadership. And I think it's time that by and large, like my son, who's in college now, he said something the other day. He said, Mom, I can see stark differences between male leadership and women leadership, right? The end point, the destination is the same. It's about outcomes and productivity. But I see differences, but I'm so happy that he's able to see that and able to bring that into the fold. But what I'm saying is that that's not the case everywhere, right? And women are still struggling to prove their case, make their rationale for growth and for promotion. So simply because they are not evaluated on their own merit, on their own capabilities, there is a lot of this expectations around what we think is leadership. And I think that literacy and that education is super important.
Got it. That's great. And maybe dig in just to follow up on that. Like how you said at the beginning about the importance of finding mentors and finding sponsors to sort of help you get to the next level. Like how what are some examples of either how people should tactically go about doing that, or some examples of where that sort of made a big difference for you?
Absolutely. So I've had mentors throughout like last 15 years or so. I've had some really good mentors in my career. Some of my managers when I was at General Motors, they really gave me projects that I thought that I wasn't sure if I could handle. They're like, no, give this a go. We feel like you can do it. Give us stretch projects, and it almost you're able to get past your own self doubt and being able to um, see yourself succeed, right? That's where it starts. Everything starts from in the mind and in one's self image of success, right? Once you see yourself do these hard things, then there's just you keep, then the momentum starts picking up. Tactically, in terms of finding mentors, I think that there are many organizations now. For starters, I've always appreciated the work that Women in Technology does, right? And there are so many other forums and organizations. I think one must actively seek out a champion and a mentor in their own line of works. For example, if somebody is in technology, somebody is in data, or somebody is in finance or HR, finding a mentor, finding a sponsor in the same space is extremely important. Sponsors are typically people who are in leadership level roles who can talk about you on your behalf when they are on a table talking about high potential candidates, right? You got to seek them, find ways to connect them, have a, even, request a coffee chat, and then start building these relationships over a period of time, right? Taking time to network and taking time to do that is extremely important. The second thing to that is, finding sponsors and champions and mentors outside your line of work is also important, because if you want to have opportunities to talk or speak, be part of a panel, you need people to get you open doors and get you into other areas as well. So LinkedIn is a great resource looking for women leaders. That there's so many that raise their hand and say, I'm here to support. I'm one of them. There's so many out there, right? Seek them out and start connecting with them, and start getting a feel for what it means to have a champion.
Yeah, it's great advice. And one of the interesting things sort of bringing up LinkedIn is how it's made everybody far more accessible. And I'm still shocked at how few people take advantage of that. Because it's sort of the way that you framed it, I think is good. Many senior leaders want highly motivated, smart, younger people to help them develop in their careers. And I also had a number of mentors that helped me over the years. And it's one of those things where they're more accessible now than they've ever been. And I don't think that many junior people understand a lot of the implications of that. So I think that's great advice for sharing. Thinking about that sort of like career development, professional development for data people. One of the things I recently launched is professional development program for data people. So I'm like talking a lot about what makes the
And
top
it's a
data
fantastic
people.
program. I'm glad you did it. It's
Oh,
really,
thank you.
it's timely.
It's been super interesting because we invest so much in trying to succeed with our data programs, millions of dollars in infrastructure and technology and team. And we really, there's like a whole category of data work that we really don't have any resources to help people learn about, like on the business side of data work, which is, it's just one of those things that's sort of like, as I'm going and doing this work, it just is just so clear to me of how big of a gap it is. It's sort of monumental. Um, but I'm having so many conversations about what top data work looks like for people. So, like, when you think about a top data person versus a typical data person, what are some of the key differences that you see?
I think the biggest difference that I see is data people who are techno-functional, right? Not just technical. When you're purely thinking of data as a technical exercise, right? I'm collecting data, I'm cleaning data, I'm analyzing data, I am, building these models, right? And it's all super, right? Making sure that you're building all these regression models and what is fantastic in being able to build analytics dashboards, right? People are fascinated by it, right? It's such a creative process, and it is, and it's like, and those who are very statistical and mathematical get to enjoy it. Fantastic. But the functional component of it is so important, right? When I say techno-functional is not just thinking of data as pure play data and cleaning up data and putting all these parameters, is to really think about what does this data mean for the organization, right? Why are we working on this particular data sets? What are we looking for in these correlations? What is the business objective, right? And I think that while there is technology and there is business, I think data is one that ties both, right? Because it is that from data all the way to this insight and wisdom. If data folks don't understand that metaphorical layer, right? Not just the technical attribute, more about what does this really mean, that I think that then you become very myopic, right? And I think I think, sees a big difference. So data folks, like as we were talking earlier about folks that understand content, right, from a contextual standpoint and being able to bring that perspective in is important. Now we're talking about AI, right? A lot of the AI governance is about, they're talking about having diverse teams that are part of building these models so that that can really help minimize and eliminate bias. Think about it. That's a techno-functional, right? So you're not just, this is not just, Solomon coming in and building these AI models. This is Solomon who's bringing a certain perspective from life, right? Either as a parent, you're coming and you're looking at it, hey, is this model really functioning? Are these requirements right? Are we introducing some kind of a bias? Or you are coming in from a particular city? Are we doing the right level of parameterization by eliminating somebody else that's outside the city? We're seeing so much of this bias is getting introduced, right? So even from an AI governance standpoint, it's really important to having these techno-functional talents within our development teams and our build teams. And so it's I think that is a key a differentiator between somebody who's just pure play using and playing with the data to really making data cool.
Yeah, that's great. And you have had this career where you've had sort of both that technical and, business leadership role, maybe starting from the technical side. Like, how did you develop on the business side? What were some of the things that you did to be able to, operate at a senior business level coming from maybe more of that technical background?
Um, I think when I was very pure play in the technical side, right, and every time I had to really focus on storytelling, I felt like I was very successful in my closer loops and closer circles. The moment I had to take that and articulate it to somebody, that is a business partner, right? And that's when, I was saying that we were not able to make much progress. That's simply because we were talking two different languages, right? And if you really look at it, at the end of the day, I read one of your, messages a while ago that data is a sidekick, but if data does a good job, it could be a hero, like a while ago, and it stuck with me. It is so true, actually. Data is an enabler, right? And technology is an enabler. But what does it enable? It enables business. It enables business progress and objectives and growth and all of this, right? And this expansion and scaling is enabled by data and tech. So we need to be able to speak that language. That's how it started for me. I started taking much interest in really what am I building? It goes back to the techno function. What am I building? Why am I building this? Who does it serve? What outcomes, right? Moving from outputs to outcomes also shifted my mindset around understanding business value, business ROI. And then once I understood that more, I was very fascinated because I wanted to be part of that camp so that I can bring my data and technology expertise to support it.
Super interesting. And thank you for bringing that up. It's that particular idea that data is the sidekick is one of those things where it it probably doesn't seem as profound as it feels to me, because and this is one of those things when you write content or when you're a senior person, there are like some lessons that are like many, many years of pain that sort of coalesce into like a little LinkedIn post. And so it's so nice to hear some other senior data person like pinpoint that one in particular, because that one is like there's so many things that people get wrong in the way that they approach data. And anyways,
I
it's
liked it.
interesting to
I
hear.
really liked it. It was a fun little, like, content base.
I love it. I love it. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm glad, we've been planning to do this for so long. I'm glad we finally
Oh,
were
18
able
months now. Yeah.
to get it done. How can people follow along with the work that you're doing and follow along with whatever you're talking about?
On LinkedIn, can reach out to me. They can DM me, especially if somebody's looking for a mentor. They want to chat, or they're looking for a friend who has been in the same space or wanting to grow, or have had maybe similar background like mine. I spoke very little English when I came to the US. I had to teach myself the language and a whole lot of other cultural attributes as I moved the States. So I can relate to a wide range of women who may have similar backgrounds. So I'm always available. I coach a good group of aspiring, very, very smart women, and I've been doing so for years. This is part of just my personal, way of giving back and connecting and helping people grow. And so I'm available. I'm on LinkedIn, and if somebody wants to read.
Well, that is an extremely kind offer. And my strong recommendation for anyone who's listening to this that hasn't already gone to LinkedIn to look at your profile is that they do it immediately and send you a message. And yeah, don't not take advantage when people offer help is one of my big
Absolutely.
maxims of life. So, all right, Maya, thank you so much. Thank you for joining, and really had a great conversation. Have a great day.